I'm Elsie, 28 female. I live in a small but comfortable apartment in the city, a little sanctuary I've built for myself away from the noise. By day, I'm a project manager, a job that requires meticulous planning and a calm demeanor, skills I've honed to perfection both in and out of the office. My life is structured, quiet, and predictable, just the way I like it. But that morning, a single text message threatened to shatter the peace I had worked so hard to create, reminding me that some plans are completely out of your control. It was a harbinger of a storm that had been brewing for years, a storm I was finally ready to face. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The notification sound on my phone chirped at exactly 7:00 a.m. I was already awake, sitting by the window with a warm cup of coffee, watching the city slowly come to life. It was my birthday, a day that for most people is filled with excitement and celebration. For me, it was a day of quiet reflection, a day I had planned to spend indulging in my own company. I had booked a solo spa day, followed by dinner at my favorite quiet Italian restaurant and a movie at home. It was, in my mind, the perfect way to mark another year. Then I saw the sender. Mom, my heart did a little dip. A text from my mother, Bethany, was never just a text. It was a summons, a directive wrapped in the guise of maternal affection. The message read, "Morning, sweetie. Skip your plans for today. We're doing a family game night for your birthday. Dad's getting the grill going. See you at 6 p.m. sharp. Don't be late." There was no happy birthday. No, what are your plans? No question mark. It was a statement, an order. My carefully constructed day of peace was just canceled. I read the message again, a familiar mix of frustration and resignation washing over me. This was classic Bethany. My desires, my plans, my feelings, they were all secondary to the grand production of family. A production in which I was always cast in a supporting role, often as the stagehand. I typed out a reply, my thumbs hovering over the screen. "Hi, Mom, that sounds lovely, but I've actually already made plans for today. Maybe we can do something this weekend?" I hit send, knowing it was futile. The three little dots appeared instantly. She was typing back immediately, a sure sign of her irritation. "Elsie, this is for your birthday. Family comes first. Your sister Mabel and Liam are already on their way. Don't be difficult. See you at 6. Difficult, that was the word. The label pinned on me anytime I dared to have a will of my own. I sighed, the warmth from my coffee cup no longer comforting. My spa day, my quiet dinner, my movie, they all evaporated into the morning air. I knew from experience that arguing would only lead to a barrage of guilt-tripping texts and calls, not just from my mother, but from my father, Alfie, and eventually my sister, Mabel, who would act as the concerned but ultimately condescending peacemaker. The rest of the day passed in a blur of muted resentment. I called the spa to cancel my appointment, the receptionist's sympathetic, "Oh, that's a shame," feeling more genuine than any birthday wish I'd receive later. I put away the new book I'd planned to read and stared at my closet, trying to decide what to wear to my own party that wasn't a party. My family lived in a sprawling suburban house about a 40-minute drive from my apartment. It was the house I grew up in, a place filled with a strange combination of happy memories and the suffocating weight of expectation. My father, Alfie, was a successful architect, a man who valued precision and order above all else. My mother, Bethany, was an interior designer who applied her professional skills to every aspect of our lives, curating our home and our family image with relentless perfectionism. And then there was Mabel. 3 years older, effortlessly charming, and a rising social media influencer, she was the golden child. Her life, her marriage to the equally polished Liam, and her career were all sources of immense pride for our parents. Her posts were a constant stream of curated happiness, exotic vacations, lavish parties, and saccharine tributes to her amazing family. I rarely made an appearance in her feed. As I drove to their house that evening, I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. It wasn't just about the canceled plans. It was about the pattern. It was about the casual disregard for me as an individual. I was an accessory to the perfect family portrait they were so desperate to maintain. My role was to be compliant, to be present, and most importantly, to be useful. I pulled into the long driveway at exactly 6:00 p.m. The house was already buzzing with energy. Through the large bay window, I could see them all gather. Dee in the living room. Mabel was dramatically recounting a story, gesturing with her hands as Liam looked on adoringly. My mother was arranging a platter of artisanal cheeses, and my father was laughing at something Mabel said. They looked like a magazine ad for familial bliss. The scene was so perfect, so staged, it made my teeth ache. I took a deep breath and walked in. "Elsie, you're here," my mother called out, her voice bright and performative. She glided over and gave me an air kiss that smelled faintly of expensive perfume. "Happy birthday, sweetie," my father said, patting me on the shoulder without taking his eyes off the game of charades Mabel was now initiating. "Happy birthday, little sis," Mabel chimed in, waving from across the room, ready to get destroyed in Pictionary. No one mentioned my canceled plans. No one asked how my day was. It was as if my life had only begun the moment I walked through their door. The knot in my stomach tightened. I plastered a smile on my face, the same one I always wore at these gatherings. It was my costume, my shield. "So good to see everyone," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally cheerful even to my own ears. My mother gestured towards the back patio. "Alfie was going to grill, but he got caught up on a call with a client. He's just put out the meat to thaw." She smiled at me, a sweet, expectant smile that I knew all too well. It was the smile that preceded a request, or rather, a command disguised as a request. Then came the words that would set the entire evening, and my future, on a new course. "We need someone to handle the burgers and hot dogs. Since you're here now," she trailed off, her eyes flicking towards the kitchen. And in that moment I knew I wasn't the birthday girl, I was the help. My mother's words hung in the air, a perfectly crafted, invisible web. "Since you're here now?" It was a masterful stroke of passive aggression, implying my arrival was the solution to a problem I hadn't created. My father's client call was a convenient excuse I'd heard 1,000 times, always deployed when a task he found tedious arose. Before I could even formulate a response, my sister Mabel chimed in from the living room, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "Oh, Elsie, you're so good at grilling. You always get the perfect char on the burgers. Way better than Dad." It was a compliment designed to be a cage, locking me into the role they had chosen. Liam, her husband, nodded in agreement. "She's right. Last time Alfie did it, my burger was practically raw." The trap was set. If I refused, I was being difficult and ungrateful on my own birthday. If I agreed, I was accepting my position as the designated laborer for the evening. I looked around the room. My father was now engrossed in his phone, the supposed client call having miraculously concluded the moment a replacement griller was found. My mother was already herding everyone towards the patio, where a pristine game of cornhole was set up. Mabel was pulling out her phone, no doubt preparing to document the perfect family game night for her followers. My mother walked into the kitchen and returned a moment later, holding a pair of long, stainless steel grill tongs. She held them out to me, the metal gleaming under the recessed lighting. It felt less like a utensil and more like a scepter being passed to the court jester. "Here you go, honey," she said, her smile never faltering. Then she turned to the others and laughed, a light, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Make yourself useful, birthday girl." The laughter that followed was the final twist of the knife. It wasn't malicious, not in a way you could easily call out. It was casual, thoughtless, and utterly dismissive. It was the laughter of people who didn't see me, only my function. They genuinely thought it was a charming little joke. I took the tongs, my hand closing around the cool metal. My smile remained fixed in place, a mask of placid acceptance. "Of course," I said, my voice steady. "Wouldn't want anyone to get a raw burger." As I stepped out onto the patio, the scene was one of idyllic domesticity. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the meticulously manicured lawn. My family had already started their game of cornhole, their laughter and playful shouts filling the air. No one offered to help. No one offered to keep me company. My presence was required, but my participation was not. The grill was a massive, top-of-the-line stainless steel behemoth that my father had bought the previous summer. It was his pride and joy, though he rarely used it himself. Beside it sat a tray laden with raw hamburger patties, hot dogs, and marinated chicken breasts, along with a stack of buns and various condiments. It was enough food for an army. I clicked the ignition, and the burners roared to life. The heat washed over my face as I began to lay the meat across the grates. The sizzle and pop of the foe. Odd hitting the hot metal was a stark contrast to the cheerful sounds of the game happening just a few feet away. I became a silent, background figure in their perfect evening, a caterer at my own party. For the next 2 hours, I stood at that grill. I flipped burgers, turned hot dogs, and carefully monitored the chicken to ensure it was cooked through. Smoke billowed around me, clinging to my hair and clothes. I was a world away from the spa day I had envisioned, from the quiet solitude I had craved. Through the haze of smoke, I watched them. I watched Mabel take selfie after selfie, posing with Liam with a glass of wine with the sunset. She posted a story to her Instagram, a slow-motion video of my father throwing a beanbag. The caption read, "Nothing better than a spontaneous family game night. So blessed. Sparkle's family-first game night macking memories." I was not in the video. I was not part of the memory being made, merely the facilitator of it. I watched my mother direct the social traffic, ensuring everyone's glasses were full, except mine, and that the conversation remained light and breezy. She orchestrated the evening with the precision of a seasoned director, and I was just part of the set dressing. At one point, Liam walked over, not to help, but to make a request. "Hey Elsie, can you make sure mine's well done? And go easy on the seasoning." He said it with the casual air of a man ordering from a restaurant menu, then walked away before I could respond. I cooked in silence, my mind a whirlwind of old hurts and fresh indignation. This wasn't a one-time event, it was a microcosm of my entire life with them. I was Elsie, the reliable one. Elsie, the one who would pick up the slack. Elsie, the one who never complained. I had played the part for so long, I think they had forgotten it was a part. They had forgotten there was a real person underneath the accommodating smile. As the last piece of chicken came off the grill, I arranged everything neatly on serving platters. I brought the food to the large outdoor dining table, where they were all now seated, laughing at some shared joke. "The food's ready," I announced, my voice sounding distant. "Oh, wonderful," my mother exclaimed. "You see, I knew you'd do a fantastic job." They all descended on the food, piling their plates high. I stood back, waiting for everyone else to serve themselves. By the time I got to the table, the best pieces were gone, and the remaining burgers were slightly overcooked. I took one anyway and sat down at the end of the table. The conversation flowed around me, but not to me. They talked about Mabel's latest brand collaboration, Liam's potential promotion, and my parents' upcoming trip to Italy. No one asked me about my work, my life, my friends. No one said, "Thank you for cooking." And most painfully, no one seemed to remember it was my birthday. The family game night for your birthday had become just another family game night. The pretense had been dropped as soon as the grill was lit. I ate my lukewarm burger in silence, the mask of a smile still glued to my face. But underneath it, something had shifted. A quiet, cold resolve was beginning to form in the pit of my stomach. They had handed me the tongs and told me to be useful. And as I sat there, invisible and ignored, I realized they were right. It was time to be useful, but not for them, for me. As dinner wound down, the dynamic shifted from active exclusion to passive neglect. The conversation continued to swirl around me, a vortex of topics in which I had no part. Mabel was now showing everyone a mock-up of a new logo for her brand, her phone being passed from person to person. Liam was deep in conversation with my father about investment strategies, speaking in a jargon-filled shorthand that effectively built a wall around their discussion. My mother, Bethany, floated between them, the ever-attentive hostess, refilling wine glasses and offering compliments on Mabel's design. I sat there, my plate empty, feeling like a ghost at the feast. This feeling was deeply familiar. It was an echo of countless other family gatherings. I remembered my high school graduation party, where my parents spent the entire time networking with the parents of my classmates, mapping out Mabel's future college application strategy. I remembered the Christmas I proudly brought home the pecan pies I had learned to make, only to watch them be pushed to the side in favor of a store-bought cake that Mabel had picked up because it was more photogenic. I remembered every achievement of mine that was met with a polite, "That's nice, dear," before the conversation immediately pivoted back to Mabel's latest triumph. Each memory was a small cut, insignificant on its own, but together they had left a tapestry of scars. Tonight was not an anomaly, it was the culmination. It was the pattern laid bare, illuminated by the harsh, unflattering light of my supposed birthday celebration. After dinner, my mother began clearing the table. "Right, let's get these cleared up so we can play some cards," she announced. I stood up instinctively, my years of programming kicking in. "I'll get it," I said, starting to gather the plates. "Oh, would you, sweetie? You're such a help," Bethany said, already turning her attention to shuffling a deck of cards. Mabel, Liam, and Alfie were already migrating back to the living room, their laughter echoing behind them. Once again, I was left alone. The task was mine. I carried the stacks of dirty plates, greasy napkins, and half-empty glasses into the kitchen. The sink was already piled high with the prep dishes my mother had used earlier. The sheer volume of it was daunting. I filled the sink with hot, soapy water and began to wash. The clatter of plates and the rush of water were the only sounds in the kitchen. From the living room, I could hear the boisterous sounds of their card game, shouts of gin and groans of defeat. The contrast was jarring. It felt like I was in a different house, a different reality. As I scrubbed a plate caked with dried ketchup, a wave of profound sadness washed over me, so intense it almost buckled my knees. It wasn't just about the work, the cooking, the cleaning. It was about the complete and utter lack of acknowledgement. The assumption that my time and energy were theirs to command. The casual cruelty of their indifference. They didn't see me as a daughter or a sister. They saw me as a utility. And tonight, on my 28th birthday, that realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I finished the dishes, my hands red and raw from the hot water. I wiped down the counters, packed the leftovers into containers, and took out the trash. The kitchen was spotless, as if the meal had never happened. I had erased all traces of my labor. When I finally walked back into the living room, they were halfway through another round of cards. No one looked up. No one acknowledged my return. It was as if I had materialized out of thin air. I sat on the armchair in the corner, the one furthest from the group. I watched them play, my face a neutral mask. The smile was gone. I didn't have the energy for it anymore. In its place was a quiet, observant calm. I was no longer a participant, not even a reluctant one. I was a spectator, an anthropologist studying a strange, alien tribe. I saw things with a new clarity. I saw the way my mother subtly manipulated every conversation to circle back to her own achievements or Mabel's. I saw the way my father's joviality was a performance, a facade that crumbled the moment he wasn't the center of attention. I saw the insecurity that fueled Mabel's constant need for validation, her life a carefully curated performance for an audience of strangers. And I saw Liam, the sycophant, whose admiration for the family was directly tied to the status and wealth they represented. They were a house of cards, beautiful and impressive from a distance, but fragile and hollow up close. And I had spent my entire life trying to be one of them, contorting myself to fit into a structure that had no room for me. The evening finally petered out around 10 p.m. There was no birthday cake. No, "Happy Birthday" song. The pretense of the occasion had been completely forgotten. "Well, this was fun," Mabel declared, stretching. "But we should get going, early start tomorrow." The goodbyes were as perfunctory as the greetings. Air kisses, shoulder pats, and promises to do this again soon. As I was walking out the door, my mother stopped me. "Thanks for your help tonight, Elsie," she said, pressing a small, gift-wrapped box into my hand. "Here, a little something for your birthday." I took the box. It was light, almost weightless. I knew, even before I opened it, that it would be something impersonal, something she had picked up on a whim, an afterthought. I drove home in silence, the little box sitting on the passenger seat beside me. I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the hum of the engine and the sound of my own breathing. The anger and sadness had subsided, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. The pattern wasn't just going to continue, I was going to break it. For years, I had been documenting their little slights, their casual cruelties, their hypocrisies. Not for any specific purpose, just as a way to validate my own sanity, to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining things. But now, sitting in the quiet of my car, a plan began to form. A plan that had been dormant for months, waiting for the right moment, the right catalyst. Tonight was that catalyst. They had handed me the tongs and told me to be useful. They had laughed. They had shown me my exact place in their world. And in doing so, they had given me the one thing I needed most: permission to stop trying. Permission to finally, truly, make myself useful. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't open the gift. I didn't need to. I knew what was inside. Instead, I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up a folder I had named Project Domino. Inside were screenshots, recordings, and documents I had been collecting for years. The evening of echoes had provided the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. The laughter, the tongs, the silence, it was all the fuel I needed. The surprise I had been planning for months was no longer a half-formed idea. It was about to become a reality. The folder on my laptop, Project Domino, was my secret garden, a place where I had cultivated the seeds of truth for years. It started innocently enough. A few years ago, after yet another holiday where my contributions were ignored and my presence felt like an afterthought, I started saving things. It was a way of coping, of validating my own feelings. When my mother would send a passive-aggressive text, I'd screenshot it. When Mabel would post a picture with a caption that was a blatant lie about how supportive her family was, I'd save it. When my father would conveniently forget a promise he'd made to me, I'd make a note of it. Over time, my collection grew. It became more than just a diary of slights. As a project manager, my mind is wired to see systems, to identify patterns and dependencies. And I began to see the intricate system of deceit and hypocrisy that held my family's perfect image together. The project got its name from the idea that if one key piece was pulled, the entire structure would collapse, just like a line of dominoes. After the disastrous birthday dinner, Project Domino evolved from a passive collection into an active investigation. The cold resolve that had settled in my heart demanded action. I wasn't just going to feel hurt anymore. I was going to use the truth as a tool. My first target was my sister, Mabel. Her entire career as a social media influencer was built on a foundation of authenticity and positivity, a brand that was diametrically opposed to the person I knew her to be. She worked with brands that promoted ethical sourcing, female empowerment, and mental wellness. It was all a sham. I started by looking into the small, independent brands she championed. A little digging revealed that many of them weren't so independent after all. I used my project management skills to trace supply chains and corporate filings. I discovered that a female-owned, artisanal jewelry brand she frequently promoted was actually a subsidiary of a massive fast fashion conglomerate known for its questionable labor practices. I found proof that a wellness supplement she swore by had been slapped with multiple warnings from health regulators for making unsubstantiated claims. I compiled the evidence meticulously. screenshots of her promotional posts next to screenshots of the corporate filings and regulatory warnings. It was a damning indictment of her hypocrisy. But the real treasure trove came from an old, shared family cloud account we had long forgotten about. Years ago, my mom had set it up for us to share family photos. No one had used it in ages, but the account was still active. One evening, fueled by coffee and a boo, Arning sense of injustice, I logged in, and there it was. Years of unsorted, uncurated photos and documents. It was a digital attic filled with the things they had forgotten to hide. I found a folder of Mabel S., filled with her early, unedited photos. The contrast between her real life and her curated online persona was staggering. There were photos of her looking bored at charity events she later described online as life-changing. There were receipts for expensive designer clothes that she claimed in her posts were thrifted finds. But the most significant discovery was a series of emails between her and Liam. In them, they openly mocked her followers, referring to them as gullible sheep. In one particularly vile exchange, they joked about how easy it was to sell useless junk to desperate women by slapping a wellness label on it. They were profiting from the very insecurities they claimed to be helping people overcome. I saved every single email. Next, I turned my attention to my parents. My father, Alfie, the pillar of the community, the successful architect. He projected an image of integrity and hard work, but I always had a suspicion about his business practices. I remembered hushed phone calls and mysteriously lost invoices from my teenage years. My investigation led me to public records of city building permits. I cross-referenced the dates of his major projects with a list of city council members and zoning officials. A pattern emerged. Certain officials always seemed to approve his controversial zoning variances. A little more digging into campaign finance records revealed that my father had been making sizable, albeit legally murky, donations to the political campaigns of these same officials through a series of shell corporations. He wasn't just a good architect, he was a master of greasing the wheels of bureaucracy. It wasn't illegal, not explicitly, but it was profoundly unethical and would be a PR nightmare if it ever came to light. My mother, Bethany, was the trickiest. Her currency was social standing. She was a queen bee in her suburban circle, known for her impeccable taste, her charity work, and her seemingly perfect family. Her hypocrisy was less about money and more about image. Her Achilles heel was her envy. She was intensely competitive with her friends, particularly one named Carol, whose children were also successful. In the Forgotten Family cloud, I found drafts of emails my mother had written but never sent. They were venomous, filled with petty gossip and cruel insults directed at her supposed best friends. She wrote about Carol's tacky home renovations and her desperate attempts to stay relevant. More damningly, I found financial records. My parents had always presented themselves as self-made, but I discovered that a significant portion of their initial wealth, the seed money for my father's firm and my mother's design business, had come from an inheritance from my grandfather. An inheritance they had essentially cheated my aunt, my father's sister, out of through a series of legal maneuvers after his death. They had told everyone my aunt had received her fair share, but the documents told a different story. They had built their perfect life on a foundation of lies and family betrayal. I spent weeks gathering, organizing, and verifying everything. Every claim had to be backed by irrefutable proof. I created separate, password-protected files for each family member, each one a digital bomb waiting to be detonated. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about liberation. It was about tearing down a facade that had been suffocating me my entire life. They had built their world on secrets and lies, all while demanding perfection and compliance from me. They had judged my quiet life, my simple job, my lack of a flashy partner, all from atop a throne of hypocrisy. As I put the finishing touches on my project, I felt a strange sense of calm. The girl who had stood silently by the grill, shrouded in smoke and humiliation, was gone. In her place was a woman who had found her voice, not in shouting, but in the quiet, undeniable power of the truth. The plan was simple. I subscribed to a service that allowed you to schedule text messages to be sent at a specific date and time. I crafted a unique message for each of them. Each message would contain a simple, terrifying sentence, followed by a link to a secure, anonymous website where I had uploaded their respective files. The messages were scheduled to be sent at exactly 8:00 p.m. on a Friday night, 1 month to the day after my birthday. I imagined them all together, perhaps enjoying another perfect family evening. Their phones would light up at the same time, each one delivering a personalized reckoning. The digital dominoes were lined up, and my finger was on the button. All I had to do was wait. The month leading up to the digital reckoning was one of the strangest of my life. On the surface, everything was normal. I went to work, I met friends for coffee, I paid my bills. But underneath, I was living with a secret, a coiled spring of anticipation. I had minimal contact with my family. My mother sent a few generic thinking of you texts, which I answered with polite, non-committal replies. Mabel posted a family photo from my birthday dinner, one of the few taken before I was relegated to the grill. She had cropped it cleverly, so my absence wasn't immediately obvious. The caption was nauseating. So grateful for a family that always makes you feel loved, especially on your birthday. Read, I looked at the picture of their smiling faces and felt nothing but a cold, distant pity. The day of the unveiling arrived. It was a Friday, exactly 1 month after the disastrous birthday. I spent the day in a state of heightened awareness. Every minute that ticked by felt significant. I left work at 5 p.m., my heart a steady drum against my ribs. I didn't feel nervous, not in the traditional sense. I felt ready. I went home and made myself a simple dinner. I sat on my couch, the city lights twinkling outside my window. My phone was on the coffee table in front of me, screen dark. The messages were scheduled to be sent at 8:00 p.m. At 7:55 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "Hi, sweetie. We're all over at Mabel and Liam's. Just ordered pizza. Wish you were here." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. They were all together. It was perfect. My plan, which I had envisioned playing out in their separate homes, was now going to unfold with them all in the same room. The dominoes wouldn't just fall, they would crash into each other. I watched the clock on my cable box. 7:58, 7:59. And then 8:00. I imagined the scene. The four of them, sitting in Mabel and Liam's stylishly minimalist living room. The pizza box open on the coffee table. The casual, comfortable chatter. And then, the simultaneous chime of 4 phones. 4 notifications lighting up 4 screens at the exact same moment. My own phone remained silent. I had, of course, not sent a message to myself. For several minutes, there was nothing. The silence in my apartment felt profound. I pictured them reading the messages, the initial confusion turning to dawning horror as they clicked the links. My message to Mabel: "Your followers deserve to know who you really are." The link would take her to the folder containing the evidence of her fraudulent brand deals, the emails mocking her fans, the unedited photos that shattered her curated image. My message to Liam: "A man is known by the company he keeps, and the secrets he helps hide." His link would lead to the same folder, ensuring he knew that his complicity was also exposed. My message to my father, Alfie: "Success built on secrets has a weak foundation." His link would reveal the meticulously documented evidence of his unethical donations and the quid pro quo relationships he had with city officials. And finally, my message to my mother, Bethany: "Family secrets are the heaviest burden." Her link would open the file containing the truth about the stolen inheritance, the venomous draft emails about her friends, and the documentation of the financial lies that propped up their entire existence. At 8:07 p.m., my phone rang. The caller ID read Mom. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. A second later, a text message from her appeared. "Elsie, call me right now. This is not funny." Then another call, this time from my father. I ignored it. Then Mabel, ignored. The calls and texts started coming in a frantic, desperate flood. They were a digital tsunami of panic and fury. From Mom, "What have you done? You are trying to ruin us. Answer your phone, Elsie, this instant. Your father is having palpitations." From Dad, "Take this down immediately. You have no idea what you're meddling with. This is slander. Our lawyers will be in touch." From Mabel, "You jealous little witch. You have always been jealous of me. My career is over. I hope you're happy. You will regret this." I read the messages, my expression unchanged. Their words had lost their power over me. The guilt, the fear, the obligation, it had all been burned away in the smoke from that grill a month ago. I had set up the website on a platform that was temporary and untraceable. It would automatically delete itself in 24 hours. They had a limited window to see the evidence of their own actions, to sit with the truth I had served them. This wasn't about public shaming. I hadn't sent the links to anyone else, not to Mabel's brand partners, not to the press, not to my mother's friends. This was for them. This was the mirror I was forcing them to look into. The most telling message came from Liam around 9:30 p.m. It was short and simple. "How much do you want?" It was the only question he could conceive of. In his world, everything had a price. Every problem could be solved with a transaction. The idea that this might be about something other than money was completely alien to him. I didn't reply to any of them. I turned my phone on silent and placed it face down on the table. The unveiling was complete. The dominoes were falling. Now, all I had to do was wait for the crash. I walked over to the small box that had been sitting on my bookshelf for a month, my mother's birthday gift. I had never opened it. I carefully undid the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a silver-plated keychain. It was engraved with the words, "World's Best Daughter." The hypocrisy was so profound, so absurd, that for the first time that night I laughed. It was a genuine, unforced laugh, a laugh of pure, unadulterated freedom. I dropped the keychain into the trash can. I didn't need a cheap trinket to tell me my worth. I had finally discovered it for myself. The 24 hours after the unveiling were a strange, surreal limbo. My phone was a constant barrage of notifications, a chorus of digital screaming that I had chosen to silence. I put it in a drawer and decided to reclaim the birthday I had lost. I went to the spa. I sat in the steam room, letting the heat soak into my bones, feeling the tension of the past month, and indeed, the past 28 years, begin to melt away. I had a long, leisurely dinner at my favorite Italian restaurant, savoring every bite of pasta, accompanied only by a good book. I went home, opened a bottle of wine, and watched a movie. It was quiet. It was peaceful. It was mine. The next evening, as the 24-hour window on the website was about to close, I finally took my phone out of the drawer. There were 57 missed calls and over 200 text messages. I skimmed through them, a detached observer cataloging the stages of their collective grief: denial, anger, bargaining, and a deep, pervasive depression. The anger was the most prominent. Mabel's texts had devolved into incoherent, typo-laden rants. She accused me of trying to destroy her life out of sheer jealousy. My father's messages were filled with legal threats and pronouncements of my disinheritance. My mother, S, were a volatile mix of fury and wounded narcissism. "How could you do this to your own mother?" one read. "After everything I've done for you." The bargaining phase came late in the night. My father offered to discuss my grievances. My mother promised that things would be different from now on. Liam had texted again, this time with a specific number, a shockingly large sum of money offered in exchange for my complete and total silence. They still didn't get it. They thought their behavior was a commodity that could be bought, sold, and negotiated. By the next morning, a creeping despair had set in. The threats had subsided, replaced by a kind of stunned silence. The website and all the evidence it contained had vanished as scheduled. The secrets were back in the box, but now they all knew that I held the key. The real fallout began a few days later. It wasn't the dramatic public explosion they had feared. It was a series of quiet, internal implosions. The first crack appeared between Mabel and Liam. I received a single, cryptic text from a number I didn't recognize. He saw the emails. "We're in counseling." I realized it was from Mabel. Liam, the adoring husband, had finally seen the unvarnished truth about the woman he married and the contempt she held for the very people who funded their lifestyle. His worship had been predicated on her perfection. Now that the illusion was shattered, their perfect marriage was crumbling. The second crack was with my parents. My aunt, my father's sister, whom they had cheated out of her inheritance, called me. I hadn't spoken to her in years. My parents had effectively painted her as unstable and greedy, and I, to my shame, had believed them. "Your mother called me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She was hysterical, something about old family business. She didn't make much sense, but she kept saying your name. I didn't tell my aunt everything, but I told her enough. I told her that I had found documents relating to our grandfather's estate and that things were not as they had been presented. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I knew it," she finally whispered. "Thank you, Elsie. Thank you for believing me, even if you didn't know it." A week later, a letter from my aunt's lawyer arrived at my parents' house. The battle they thought they had won decades ago was about to be fought again. Only this time, the truth was out. The third crack was social. My mother's world revolved around her status. While I hadn't shared her venomous emails with her friends, the stress of the situation was clearly getting to her. I heard through the grapevine that she had an emotional outburst at her book club, lashing out at her friend Carol in a way that shocked everyone. The queen bee was losing her composure. The carefully constructed facade of serene perfection was cracking under pressure, and her social circle was starting to back away from the shrapnel. My father retreated into his work, becoming more withdrawn and paranoid. He pulled out of a major project proposal, fearing the increased scrutiny. The confidence that had defined him was replaced by a quiet, gnawing fear. He was a man who had built his empire on secrets, and he now knew that his own daughter was a walking, talking liability. They never tried to contact me as a group again. The united front was broken. They were isolated in their own private circles of hell, consumed by the secrets I had reflected back at them. They had spent their lives curating a perfect family portrait, and in one evening, I had shown them that the canvas was rotten. I had expected to feel a sense of triumph, a rush of vindication. But instead, what I felt was a profound sense of peace. It wasn't about their suffering, it was about my freedom. I was free from their expectations, their judgment, their casual cruelty. The heavy cloak of familial obligation I had worn for 28 years had been lifted, and I could finally stand up straight. The silence from them was a gift. It was a quiet space where I could finally begin to hear my own voice. I was no longer Elsie, the useful one. I was no longer Elsie, the background character. I was just Elsie, and for the first time in my life, that felt like more than enough. The fallout wasn't just their destruction, it was my reconstruction. In the weeks and months that followed the fallout, the silence from my family was absolute. It was a heavy, deafening silence, more powerful than any of their angry words had been. They had, in essence, excommunicated me. I was no longer invited to family events, not that there seemed to be many. The curated perfection of their lives had been a group project, and with the lead architect of their hypocrisy gone, the entire structure had been abandoned. I saw glimpses of their new reality through the digital grapevine. Mabel's social media presence changed dramatically. The constant stream of saccharine posts about her blessed life slowed to a trickle. The brand deals dried up. Her follower count stagnated. She pivoted to a new brand of raw honesty, posting tearful videos about navigating difficult times and the importance of setting boundaries, a bitter irony that was not lost on me. She never mentioned the specifics, but her audience could sense the shift. The effortless charm was gone, replaced by a desperate, grasping need for relevance. I heard from a distant cousin that she and Liam had sold their house and downsized. The perfect life was no longer affordable. My parents retreated completely. They sold the large suburban house I grew up in, the stage for so many of my humiliations, and moved to a condo in a different state. My mother deleted her social media. My father retired early. They were running away, not from me, but from the wreckage of their own lives. They couldn't face the community they had lied to, the friends they had deceived, or the family they had betrayed. Their final act was one of cowardice, a quiet retreat into obscurity. I never heard the resolution of my aunt's legal battle, but one day, a check arrived in my mail. It was for a substantial amount of money, with a simple note from my aunt enclosed. "This was your mother's share of the settlement," it read. "She refused it. I think you deserve it. Thank you for giving me back my past. Now go build your future." I looked at the check for a long time. It felt like blood money, the product of decades of deceit. But my aunt was right. It wasn't about the money, it was about the justice it represented. I invested it, using it as a down payment on my own small condo, a place that was truly mine, built not on lies, but on a foundation of hard-won truth. Life became quiet, but it was a good quiet. It was the quiet of a peaceful morning, not the quiet of an empty room. I excelled at work, receiving a promotion to senior project manager. Without the constant drain of my family's drama, I had so much more energy to devote to my career and, more importantly, to myself. I reconnected with old friends I had drifted away from, people who saw me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. I started dating, cautiously at first, but eventually I met someone kind and genuine, a man who listened when I spoke and who celebrated my successes as if they were his own. He knew about my family, not the sordid details, but the general shape of the hurt. He never pushed me to reconcile. He simply said, "Their loss," and held my hand. One day, about a year after the unveiling, I was cleaning out a closet and found an old photo album. I flipped through the pages. There we were, Bethany, Alfie, Mabel, and me, a smiling, happy family, but I saw it with new eyes now. I saw the strain in my own smile, the way I was always standing slightly on the edge of the frame. I saw the performative nature of their affection. It was a photo album of strangers. I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt a sense of closure. I closed the album and put it in a box in the back of the closet. That chapter of my life was over. They were characters in a story that had reached its end. That evening, I sat on the balcony of my new condo, a glass of wine in my hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. The silence from my family was no longer a void. It was a space that I had filled with my own life, my own joy, my own peace. They had handed me the grill tongs and told me to be useful. They had laughed, thinking my use was to serve them. But they were wrong. My true use, my true purpose, was to serve the truth, and in doing so, I had not destroyed them. I had simply stepped out of the way and allowed their own lies to bring their hollow world crashing down. I had cooked their last meal, cleaned up the mess, and left quietly. And as I watched the sun rise on my new life, I knew, with a certainty that filled my entire being, that I was finally, irrevocably free.